everyone, and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. Challenges remain as producers in Oklahoma try to get their wheat seed in the ground and established. Joining us now is Dr. Amanda Silva, our small grains extension specialist. And Amanda, these hot and dry conditions, things are not looking so great.
Not so great. Well, last season we had one of the worst droughts we had in a long time. And we were hopeful conditions were going to improve by time of planting, but it doesn't seem to be that way with the current forecast.
Let's talk about the hot soil and what that means for germination, so we kind of understand what the seed and the plant is trying to do right now.
Yes. So if you look at the Mesonet this week, you look at soil temperature. In Oklahoma, we were up in the 80s across the state. Some locations 86 Fahrenheit, and some locations reached about 97, 99 Fahrenheit in soil temperature. Germination can happen anywhere from 40 to 99 Fahrenheit, but the optimal temperature for germination is anywhere from 54 to 77. And so those hot soil conditions, they can really harm germination, especially for some varieties that are sensitive to those high temperatures at germination. And so usually in those scenarios, we recommend for producers, if they have varieties that are sensitive to germination in hot soils, so they learn about it and do not plant that so early in September. The exception is that this year we are already mid-late September and soils are really high. The soil temperature is really high. We could see some delay in that germination.
We talk a lot when it's this serious of a drought about dusting in the seed. Is that what's happening, and what guidance do you have for producers given these challenges?
Yes, so there are different ways we can go about it when planting in dry soils. One of the strategies is to dust in the seed and wait for the rain to drive that germination. Or we could try to plant deeper to reach moisture, which it's not really the case here in our state right now, as subsoil moisture is also really limited. And so I am hearing a lot of producers that's going to be the plan, and it's actually going to be our plan as well. So I would just say watch for that seeding depth. So optimal seeding depth for wheat planting is anywhere from 1 to 1.5 inches. When we are dusting in, waiting for that rain to drive germination, we might plant a little shallower than that, so maybe 3/4 of an inch to an inch. I would just be careful with planting too shallow. Maybe 1/2 inch could be too shallow in most cases, so just watch for that.
Producers are asking some questions about small seed size. What kind of guidance do you have there?
Well, what we are seeing it is because of the drought we had last year, seed this year is really small. What we are seeing in our studies is that seeds, even though they're small, we are still having a very good germination rate. I think that the main thing to keep in mind is that their seeding rate, especially if they're planting on a pounds per acre, that they might need to adjust it. And so that's also another thing that we'll have available in our blog.
And you and the team are also working on some fact sheets that we hope to see soon.
Yeah, so our team is working really hard on that. So we are really evaluating emergence, because we do need to update that information for current varieties. So evaluating the emergence of those seeds in hot soil conditions. So we'll have some information on that on our blog, on our website, so producers can take a look at it.
Okay, Amanda, thank you very much for the update. We will see you again very soon. And for a link to the materials that Amanda just mentioned, go to sunup.okstate.edu.
Welcome to the weekly Mesonet Weather Report. I'm Wes Lee. The weather lately has been more of the same, hot and dry, after more hot and dry. We normally expect the fall of the year, September and October, to be the second wettest time of the year after the spring. However, so far this year, the rain has just not fallen as expected. Every month this year, except May, has came in with lower than normal statewide rainfall. If May had not been so wet and replenished some soil moisture, we would be in even a more serious situation. For the last 2 weeks, rainfall has been very short and the rain prospects look pretty dismal. This map from midweek shows no station receiving an inch. The only one close was the 0.92 inches at Cherokee. Of course, this lack of rain has our soil moisture at critically low levels going into wheat planting season. This map is the percent of plant available water from the surface down to 4 inches. You see a lot of teen and single digits in this zone critical for seed germination. Unfortunately, the data doesn't get any better when you look deeper in the soil profile. Here down to 32 inches, the map looks even more red, which is the bottom end of the moisture. Now here's Gary with some temperature information.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Well, we're in the midst of a really long, hot, dry spell once again, and that does nothing for the drought situation except make it worse. Let's get to the latest drought monitor map and see what we have. Well, it's pretty ugly. We have the large area now across central into east central and down into southeastern Oklahoma. We have that large area of exceptional drought. That's the D4 drought. That's a 1 in 50 to 100 year event. That's as bad as it gets. And we have that other little splotch down there in southwest Oklahoma. We have a new one up there in north central Oklahoma. Unfortunately, it's just continuing to spread. We have way too many reds and browns on the map. We certainly hope we get some rainfall soon, but until we do, the heat and the lack of rainfall is going to continue to exacerbate these drought conditions. And these colors are going to continue to spread across the state. Taking a look at the 90-day rainfall map, we can see down there in the part of southeastern and up into central Oklahoma where the D4 was just introduced, that area has had basically 1 inch to 3 inches of rain. A couple of places had a little bit more, but in general, that's a really hard-hit area of the state that's been going out without rainfall for a long period of time. On the departure from normal map, look at that area once again, nearly 9 inches below normal for the last 90 days. And up there in north central, northeastern part of the state where we also had that D4 introduced, nearly 10 inches below normal, for instance, in Osage County. So many areas of the state continuing to go without significant rainfall for a very long period of time. Now we're in the midst of a little bit of a period with some cooler weather, very little rainfall, however, and when we take a look into the next week, we start to see things aren't looking great in that period either. So as we get into the last of September, the beginning week of October, we see increased odds of above normal temperatures, again across much of the center part of the country in Oklahoma. This is from the Climate Prediction Center. And unfortunately, to go along with that, we see increased odds of below normal precipitation. So unfortunately, a little bit of the same continuing as we go forth into October. Now this isn't really that shocking. This is how droughts work, and unfortunately until we get some significant rainfall across many parts of the state, that drought will continue to intensify and spread. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
Talking wildlife now, and the recent case of a fatal disease in deer discovered near the Oklahoma border. SUNUP's Curtis Hare gets us up to speed.
We're joined now by Colter Chitwood, who is a wildlife professor here at Oklahoma State University. And Colter, we're talking chronic wasting disease right now, and there was a case that was found recently close to Oklahoma. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, there was a vehicle-killed white-tailed doe in Texas that was tested positive for CWD, and because it was within 5 miles, it was actually about 2.5 miles from the Oklahoma border, the state of Oklahoma is treating it as if it was inside our borders, which is what's activated the chronic wasting disease response plan that folks have been hearing about in the last couple weeks.
So over the years, we've talked about CWD here on SUNUP, but let's give a quick overview of what this disease is and why it's so concerning.
Yeah, so CWD is a always fatal degenerative neurological disease of ungulates. So white-tailed deer, mule deer, elk, moose, caribou, they're all susceptible. The good news is for folks that are out in the panhandle area, the pronghorn are not susceptible, or at least there's no evidence they are. But it's basically a long-term condition that results in death for the individual, and there is no vaccine or treatment. And it kind of turns their brain to Swiss cheese, that's what people say, but it's caused by a malformed prion. And so, yeah, it can be heck on deer populations.
So how does it spread, and what are some things that people need to keep in mind when it comes to CWD?
Yeah, so CWD spreads among deer through direct contact, but increasingly there's evidence that it spreads through the environment with potentially through feces, saliva, possibly urine. So even deer that are in an area where other infected deer have been could be susceptible that way, say like from areas that they're foraging in or whatever. But from a human perspective, the good news is right now there's no evidence that it actually jumps the species barrier. That said, most places, and you follow the links that we'll provide at the end of this, are going to suggest hunters should not consume meat from a sick deer or a deer that's known to be positive.
And you mentioned that there was a CWD response to this case that was close to Oklahoma, or considered actually in Oklahoma. So what does that entail?
What it entails usually is the state is now going to perhaps put more effort into monitoring in that immediate area. That could be through communications from ODWC with hunters, maybe trying to submit heads. So you say a hunter harvests a deer, well, there's ways that you can submit samples to cooperate with ODWC to get additional tests in that area. That would be one way. Increased communication about how to dispose of carcasses. In general, it's always best not to just go to the nearest bridge and dump it in a creek. We don't want you to do that anytime, but you certainly don't want to do that with CWD. So there's going to be increased communication about that as well, I'm sure.
So definitely a concern, but maybe not something to be overly concerned with.
Correct. It's early yet, which is good, but increased testing in that area will give the state a better sense of whether or not CWD is highly prevalent in that area near the panhandle. And because it doesn't jump to humans, we just want to tell hunters to be cautious, to be aware that the human version of this, the fancy term is transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. The human version of CWD, it would be fatal to humans as well. The thing is, CWD has not been shown to cross into humans. It also has not been shown to cross to livestock. So for livestock producers in those areas, and like pronghorn that we talked about before, there's no known jump yet, but we want to be aware of that because most of the viewers have probably heard of mad cow disease. Well, that's another one that's in the same family of diseases.
All right, thanks, Colter. It's good to have you on. And for more information about chronic wasting disease, go to our website, sunup.okstate.edu.
Good morning, Oklahoma. Welcome to Cow-Calf Corner. This week's topic, kind of unfortunately, continues along the same theme of dealing with drought and deteriorating pasture conditions. And today we're going to talk about the benefits of early culling of beef breeding heifers. By early culling, what I'm really getting into is, as opposed to waiting later in the fall or potentially keeping those heifers that we intended to be bred heifers right now on hand to find out that they weren't going to calve on time or came up open by next spring, we're actually going to use the technology available to us, which is we can determine ultrasound pregnancy status, or I should say pregnancy status with ultrasound as early as 30 days along. We can get our veterinarian to come determine pregnancy status by palpation at about 60 days along. So by sleeving those heifers or ultrasounding to determine pregnancy status right now, those heifers that are open can be marketed. We can take them off the feed bill. We can reduce the stress on our pastures. And that's the first big benefit of early culling of these open heifers that we intended to be bred at this point. The second and third things we get into kind of have to do with holding heifers accountable and what we accomplish long term. A heifer that's well developed going into her first breeding season And actually at 65% of her mature weight, whenever we're trying to get her bred for the first time, that should be the easiest time in that beef breeding female's life to actually get bred. They should be able to accomplish that in a 45 to 60 day breeding season. So if we can determine their pregnancy status right now, those heifers can still be marketed as yearlings, fed out, and finish at their compositional endpoint, still in the A maturity group, where they're eligible for the highest quality grades, prime and choice, worth the most money. So they actually have greater value right now, marketed as open yearling heifers, than they would have down the road. Third thing that we accomplish by culling our open breeding heifers is just improving the long-term genetic potential for reproductive efficiency in our cow herd. As I said, the most fertile time in a breeding female's life should be getting her bred as a yearling. She is without the nutritional stress of lactating that she's going to be dealing with every other year after she's calving and trying to get bred in that 85-day window postpartum. So by eliminating those subfertile females as open heifers, we end up with more genetic potential for reproductive efficiency in our cow herd long term. We end up with more cows in production that are actually going to wean off a calf for us every 12 months of their productive life. Those are the three big benefits of early culling beef breeding heifers. And thanks for joining us this week on Cow Calf Corner.
It's time to check in on the crop markets with our grain marketing specialist, Dr. Kim Anderson. So Kim, what happened to wheat prices this week?
Well, they were trending down. You know, last week they dropped off a little bit. On Monday they were lower, but then on Tuesday we had a big increase in wheat prices, and we got wheat prices going from about $8.70 a bushel to $9.25 a bushel in northern Oklahoma. And I think the important thing is that those cash prices broke that $9 level, and that's been a resistance point lately in wheat prices. So we're above that. We'll just have to see where we're going from here.
So why the volatility?
Well, I think the big reason for the increase in prices is what's going on in the Ukraine with Russia. Ukraine's been taking territory that Russia had captured earlier. President Putin has been under the gun. There's been calls for him to resign within Russia, and the way he sees to get his points back up, get back popularity increasing, is to start winning in Ukraine. He says he's going to call 300,000 reservists in, that he may go nuclear, and that he may shut down the Black Sea again. And when he starts threatening like that, then prices are going to move.
Do you think that that's going to spill over to corn and beans at all?
We didn't see any spillover into corn and beans, and I was surprised at that, especially corn with Ukraine, because Ukraine has been exporting corn. But I think that shows that the world is more concerned with food, with the wheat as the food, than it is with corn or soybeans. You look at corn, around $7.60. It dropped off a little bit early in the week. It came back a little bit, but not much moves at all in corn. Same thing with soybeans, up around $4.15. It dropped off 30 cents or so, which is not much for beans, and came back and recovered that area. So not much going on there. Also in cotton, really no impact. You know, cotton has fallen from about $1.16 for that December contract down to 93. It came up to about 96. The big impact is wheat.
So besides Russia and Ukraine, is there anything else impacting prices?
I think the dollar index, and that increasing value of the US dollar, I think, is having an impact on all the prices. You go back to April, that index was 98. It's up near 111 right now. That's a 13% increase in the value of the dollar, and that means our commodities are 13% more expensive on the world market. And I think you got to look at exports and the demand for exports. That's what's been driving our prices. 4 years in a row, world wheat production has been a record, but also 4 years in a row, consumption has been at a record and also higher than production. So we were losing stocks. And I think what you got to look at there, does the consumer, would they rather have an extra bag of flour on the shelf or be wondering where they're going to get that next bag? And I believe our use has increased because we're stocking the flour and the importing countries are stocking the wheat.
All right, thanks, Kim. Dr. Kim Anderson, grain marketing specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
More concerns as this hot and dry weather continues. If you've already planted or will soon be planting wheat for pasture, be on the lookout for fall armyworms. OSU Extension entomologist Tom Royer offers some guidance.
Anybody that's planting wheat for dual purpose or even harvesting for hay, they're going to want to make sure they get a lot of forage in the fall, and they don't want to have that forage delayed by insects. They're going to have to worry about rainfall and that kind of thing. They certainly don't want to have it delayed by insects. And two of the ones that are really frequent out here now are grasshoppers and potential for fall armyworm. We seem to get that about every year now. So for grasshoppers, a lot of times they tend to hang more around the edges of a field than they do to go all the way through it. So a farmer needs to probably be looking to make sure that the grasshoppers are not overwhelming the edges of the field. But fall armyworms will deposit their eggs anywhere, so it's really important that they, as the wheat is emerging, that they start looking for signs that of activity by the caterpillars as they're hatching. And of course, we talk about that a lot of times. That's with window painting. It's an early indicator of a fall armyworm infestation. Then they need to go out and scout to make sure that they have that they're actually seeing the armyworms themselves. There's a lot of ways to do it, but for me, just the simplest way is to get a coat hanger like this, which is about 2/3 of a square foot. If you get 6 or 9 of these squares and take the counts of the caterpillars in there, you're going to get an idea of how many per square yard or how many per square foot that you actually have. So, and we usually suggest that if you have 2 to 3 per square foot or 2 to 3 per linear foot a row in your wheat, that you need to probably treat. The key to treating for fall armyworms, particularly this time of year when the wheat's small, there's not a lot of foliage, is to make sure if you're going to make an application of an insecticide to use as much carrier as you can. If I'm doing ground rig, I wouldn't want to use anything less than 20 gallons per acre because you got to get it covered on the ground and on the foliage itself so that any caterpillars that are crawling around get in contact with the insecticide. We're always dependent on how things happen south of here as they start moving north, and if we're in an extended drought, that's probably an indication that they're not going to do as well as they would otherwise in their overwintering grounds. They won't build up as fast because survival rates are probably lower. I'm always hesitant to try and predict whether an insect's going to be a problem or not because weather changes, things changes. If we get a hurricane that grabs things from the south and blows them up, that could make a difference as well. So, but right now it just seems like the fall armyworm activity is kind of low compared to what it has been the last couple years.
Finally today, given the conditions, it's more important than ever to efficiently feed your livestock this winter and limit hay waste. Here's Dr. Dave Lawman with some recommendations.
We started the year after having used our hay storage, and so we didn't carry hardly any hay over in the state of Oklahoma here this year. We had a long, tough winter. And then, of course, we had a very dry spring and then a dry, hot summer. And so the hay stocks are very limited. And, if you weren't able to raise enough hay, it's hard to find and very expensive this year. Consequently, people are interested, rightfully so, in ways to stretch their hay supply. And just 2 simple methods that might work for some people. To do that, first of all, we've talked about this a lot on the SUNUP program, but that is simply use an efficient hay feeder. We've discovered, that there's tremendous difference in the style of hay feeder in terms of hay waste. And we've discovered that the really good efficient feeders waste only somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 8% of the original bale weight. Some of the lower end feeders, I'll describe those here in just a minute, but some of the lower end feeders consistently have wasted 20 to 21%. And certainly this is not a year to be wasting that much of the hay crop. What differentiates a good hay feeder or an efficient hay feeder from an inefficient one? We think there's 2 primary features that make the difference. That is a solid ring or skirt around the bottom of that feeder, about the bottom 18 inches. You can imagine that keeps a lot of the hay from gradually rolling out of the bottom side of that feeder. The second feature that makes a big difference is some sort of a modified basket or cone mechanism to hold that bale towards the middle of the feeder until the hay gets low and kind of falls out below that hay or below the basket or the cone mechanism. Of course, another very efficient way to feed hay is to roll it out with, whether it be a piece of machinery. Sometimes if the bales aren't too tight, you can start at the top of a hill and roll it down the hill. It's a little challenging to moderate or control the amount of hay that you feed that way. But if you can feed just enough hay so that the cattle in that pasture clean it up in that 24-hour period, the hay waste is dramatically reduced. If you go the rolling hay out route, once you get to the time of year where they're relying primarily on hay as their forage source, you have to feed it every day. But it is a way to tremendously reduce hay waste.
That'll do it for us this week. Remember, you can see SUNUP anytime on our website and also follow us on YouTube and social media. I'm Lyndall Stout. Have a great week, everyone, and remember, Oklahoma agriculture starts at SUNUP.